I remember the year by the sound of bells that would not keep to their hours. In Florence we knew how a day should sing. Matins from Santa Maria del Fiore, the chatter of markets under the Calamala, the Arno whispering like a patient friend. But in 1348 the bells forgot the calendar and rang whenever a cart turned a corner with a sheet-covered shape. I was there, an apprentice at the hospital of Santa Maria Nuova, hands stained with vinegar and smoke, counting pulses that fluttered like candle flames in a draft. The first ones came in from the road to Pisa, drivers with throats raw from dust who said in a tired voice that farther west whole villages sat silent with doors open. We argued in the pharmacy while grinding rosemary and rue. Was it corruption of air, Saturn's malice, or the anger of God? The master sent me to the ward with sponges steeped in vinegar and told me not to breathe too deeply. I tried to obey. The breath disobeyed me. You learn a city's anatomy when you carry the sick. Florence has narrow ribs where the houses lean toward each other until their eaves are almost holding hands. The plague found those alleys quickly. We chalked crosses on doors, wrapped the fevers in whatever cloth we had left, and walked them toward the hospital or, when there were no beds, to the little house outside the San Gallo gate where no one ever returned. Men who had pulled wine barrels all their lives became light as straw in our arms. A woman's skin went yellow as wax in an hour. The swelling under her arm rose like a plum and blackened before evening. Some bled from places that should keep their secrets. Others simply fell still like drained pitchers. I thought I knew the range of human color. I learned new shades and new silences. The city began to divide itself by courage and by fear. Some locked their doors and lived on salted beans, sending servants to knock for news. Others threw their doors open and drank as if they could drown the pestilence from the inside. A few walked barefoot in the streets, whipping their shoulders until their backs shone, chanting in voices already hoarse. We were told to keep the procession small so that breath would not mingle. We lit fires of juniper and laurel in the squares to clean the air. The smoke made your eyes water and your throat sweet, a taste I still find in my mouth on certain mornings when the river fog is low. At first the priests came whenever we called, carrying the small pyx beneath a cloth, whispering Latin that sounded like a hand soothing a fevered brow. Then the calyx passed from palm to palm faster than wax tablets could note the names. We ran out of beeswax for candles and tore linen into strips for wicks. The gravediggers grew hoarse shouting for carts. We dug long trenches on the far field beyond the walls where the soil ran loam-dark, and we sprinkled lime as if we were sowing winter grain. The ground steamed on cold days and smelled like broken seashells. I learned the weight of a plague year in small items. The thimble in the pocket of a dead seamstress, 3 peppercorns in a dead merchant's purse, a child's red thread tied twice around a wrist for luck that did not come. I kept a tally on a slate near the apothecary's scales, a habit at first useful, later terrible. When the numbers blurred, I wiped the slate with wine and began again. A clerk came once, a sober young man with eyes like wet bark, asking how many beds were full, how many left. He spoke softly about gathering stories when I had a moment to spare. "No one will believe us otherwise," he said. I was rinsing gauze in sour water. "I will write when the water stops," I answered, meaning the river, the eyes, everything. We had rules that worked for a week before breaking. No goods from outside the walls, until someone's cousin carried sacks of grain past the gate, pale with hunger. No wakes, until a mother sat on her threshold and sang to a bundle that no one would help her lift. The city fathers ordered houses aired at noon and sprays of vinegar thrown on floors. We obeyed, and still the swellings rose. We burned perfumed pastilles and wore little bags of herbs at the throat. My master bled a furious banker who insisted his humors had turned to smoke. The man died holding the silver bowl as if it were a mirror he could step through. There were mercies. Some few who burned with fever opened their eyes again and asked for bread. A child whose father had been taken slept a long night and woke with dry skin, and his first word was apricots, which I took as an omen that summer would still come. When we washed the dead, we placed a sprig of rosemary in their hands if we had it, because a good smell is a faithful friend at the border. A nun from the hospital taught me to sing as we carried men. Not prayers but little work songs about the harvest and the grape press, because they keep the lungs honest and the steps in time. The rich fled to villas until the villas filled with the same air. The poor stayed and learned a cruel arithmetic. How many mouths remain? How many onions? How many days between cough and silence? Prices fell. Prices rose. The market learned how to be empty. A goldsmith paid a cooper with a loaf of bread, and the cooper cried in the street while holding it, the way a man might hold a newborn he thought he would never see. Even the Arno respected our grief for a time, moving past us quieter than its nature. Sometimes I think I saw angels, and sometimes I know I saw just men. One night a bell tethered high in a little church began to ring as if a wind had gripped the rope, and there was no wind. We ran in with our lamps and found a boy on a stool, ringing for his mother because he did not know what else to do. We carried him to the sisters. He held the rope end in his sleep. Another night a stranger from Siena arrived with a cart of bread he refused to sell. "I cannot keep it," he said, "and I cannot throw it away." He left before dawn, and the bread lasted 3 wards and a corridor. My master's hands cracked until he could not thread a needle, so I stitched for him. Vinegar ate the skin from between my fingers until they looked webbed. Once I went home to my mother's house to sleep and found the door open. On the table she had set out 2 cups and a plate, polished to a shine for a guest who never came. She had died in her chair with her hands folded as if she finally believed the lesson I had never learned. Rest when you can. I washed the cup and put it away. I could not bury in daylight anymore. When the heat took the city by the throat and shook it, something loosened. Perhaps the sickness had run out of new doors to open. Perhaps the smoke had finally taught the air patience. Perhaps the prayers fell in sufficient number to weigh down the scale. One morning fewer carts turned the corner. Another morning the bells rang at the proper hour. A woman came to market with fennel tied in bundles. A man sold peaches webbed with down that made your lips itch. I stood on the bridge and watched fish turn in the Arno like coins in a fountain where someone had wished too boldly and been heard. We counted who was left. There were empty chairs at every table, names that would never be spoken in anger again. A painter I knew began to sketch faces in the hospital courtyard. Nurses, porters, a boy with a scar on his lip, because he said the city must remember itself or it would wake one day and not know its own reflection. A notary opened a book and wrote down the price of bread even when there was enough, because memory must be measured sometimes to be trusted. I looked at my hands and decided to keep them for healing. A sword has nothing left to do when an enemy slips through every seam. Years later, when a hot wind slides over the water and makes the bridges whisper, I still taste vinegar and smoke. On feast days the bells ring in their good order, and in the echo you can hear the year that forgot its hours. People will say the plague ended things. Feasts, households, certainties. I say it also began things we needed and had been too slow to learn. Mercy given without asking to whom, courage practiced without audience, the habit of looking a stranger in the face and seeing a neighbor. Florence learned to breathe again. The chest lifts, the chest falls. The city lives, and so do I, who once counted pulses that died like candles and now count stitches that hold. If I close my eyes at noon, I can hear the bells as they ought to be, clear notes strung from tower to tower, and underneath them, very faint, the work song the nun taught me. It is the sound a city makes when it has decided to keep living.